Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Peace and blessings be upon all of you, those who are on the screen and those who are not. We thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for giving us the ability and the privilege to be here this afternoon. And I appreciate every one of you for giving your Saturday afternoon in US and Saturday evening in Bosnia Herzegovina for having this conversation and dialogue. My name is Shakil Sayed. I am sitting in Los Angeles. I will make a frail attempt to be your moderator this afternoon to commemorate and pray and remember and be inspired by the resistance and the resilience of our brothers and sisters in Bosnia Herzegovina. This is the month when our brothers and sisters in Bosnia are commemorating the genocide of Bosnian people by the fascist Serbs. And we pledge and we reaffirm that we shall never forget that genocide. And today is an attempt in that direction. This program is organized by the ICNA, Islamic Circle of North America Council for Social Justice. The executive director of ICNA CSJ, as it is known, is Dr. Zahid Bukhari, who is here with us. And I would like to invite him to say a few words to set us up, inshallah, and then we will proceed with the program. Dr. Zahid, it's all yours.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Nahmaduhu nusalli ala rasulih al-Kareem. Brother Shakil, thank you very much. And really, I would like to welcome Dr. Hikmat and Dr. Mirsad. And mashallah, I think I'm really grateful for Dr. Mirsad because this is the third program we were able to have on this commemoration or 25-year commemoration. So what I would like to say that the Bosnia, that genocide in Srebrenica and the crisis in Bosnia, it has a very great impact on American Muslim community. It's a very strange thing, but I think the number one is, I will say, if I just count down those impact, number one, that the first time the Muslims living in America in the West, especially here, they came to know that there are Muslims in the heart of Europe. They were not aware of that. And that genocide is going on when the first time they saw I think the cover story in Newsday by Gutman, that the concentration camp type situation. But then when they saw that, and then the education is going on, I think the American Muslim community learn how to mobilize the whole community and the society, how to work in a united front with all national organization and masajid, and they got together and we formed, ICNA initiated that, and alhamdulillah, we were able to form Bosnia Task Force. They did the biggest, I think, largest demonstration in New York in front of UN and Washington, D.C. in front of White House. And they had the Muslim leadership delegation along with Champion Muhammad Ali. They had very fruitful and productive meeting with the UN Security Council members, and there was a press conference over there. So their demands were that this ethnic cleansing should be declared genocide. The lifting of the embargo, that was very powerful demand the Muslim community was making again. And they also, I think, the White House and the Senate and congressmen, they were appealing that. The rape should be considered as also war crime. And those who are committing all these crimes, they should be declared as war criminals. So with that working together, I think ultimately what happened in the American Muslim community, now there are several experiments. They formed National Shura Council. Then it was transferred to a summit, then a coordination council. And ultimately, we had now a U.S. Council of Muslim Organization as United Front. I think that front is the ultimate culmination of Bosnia Task Force with working together over there. Same thing with the relief organization. I think the American Muslim community, they did a huge operation with different relief organization in Bosnia and after that in Kosovo. So what they learned from there, I think we got doctors from all over the world to do services over there. So they know they are expanding their work also in other part of the world. So I think that is the contribution. I understand the situation over there, but that close connection with the community. And when also the more people Bosnia came here, I think the most different masajid, they did, I think, a lot of good services for these refugees over there, settlement over there. And how much their community is flourishing here. So I think that connection, just like to remind us and remind to everybody that I think the American Muslim community owe to this Bosnian, our Muslim brothers and sisters, our children, that they work, but I think they also, Muslim community got matured, learned a lot of things, and learn all this working together, and still they are working into that direction. Thank you very much. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.
Jazakumullah khairan, Dr. Zahid, and may Allah bless everyone who is involved in the Islamic Circle of North America and also with the Council for Social Justice to dedicate your time, your resources, and giving this platform for this very, very important part of history of Muslims throughout the world, and particularly in the Western Hemisphere. So a little bit of housekeeping for viewers and for speakers and for myself. We will have approximately an hour, but if the spirit moves, we will go longer. If the speakers are not tired, then we will explore further. But approximately 20 or so minutes each of the two speakers will share their reflections on this commemoration, followed by questions and between the panelists and also from the viewers. Those of you who are watching this program, you're welcome to plug in your comments or questions in the chat box that you see on your screen. And I will try to consolidate as many as possible and ask as many questions as possible. But those, if I am unable to pick up your question, it doesn't mean that it is unimportant, but it is only because of either the time constraints or the relevancy to the program itself. As Dr. Zahid had reminded us, that many of us as Muslims living in the United States may not necessarily have known the history of Bosnia and Herzegovina as much as we know today, back in 1992 or in early 90s. So I would like to briefly read a paragraph from a book by Noel Malcolm, A Short History of Bosnia and Herzegovina, in which in one paragraph he summates history of Bosnians for over 600 years. And it reads as follows. Bosnia and Herzegovina is a European country with a long history. It has existed as a geopolitical entity almost without break from the medieval period to the present. For the greater part of the period 1180 to 1436, it was an independent kingdom. From 1580 to 1878, it was an eyalet, meaning the term for the largest territorial unit within the Ottoman Empire. From 1878 to 1918, it was a crown land within the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And from 1945 to 1992, it was one of the federal republics of Yugoslavia, thus leading us to where we are today. April 6, 1992, Europe recognized Bosnia-Herzegovina as an independent country and a nation. May 22, 1992, United Nations recognized Bosnia-Herzegovina as an independent state. And the same day, the process of genocide started in Bosnia-Herzegovina, which led to almost 3 years, hundreds of thousands of people massacred, men, women, and children, hundreds of thousands of people in diaspora today, more than 2 million by some accounts. But that war or that genocide lasted for 3 years until November 1, 1995, when the Dayton draft agreement was signed in Dayton, Ohio. And December 14th, that Dayton peace agreement was signed. And I would quote a very profound line by Alija Izetbegovic about Dayton agreement, where he said that it is as less bad than a continuation of war. July 11 to July 22 was the killing, brutal, grotesque inhumanity displayed by the Serbian fascist in the city of Potokari in Srebrenica, where the last we know, 8,372 men, women, and children are laid to rest. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala today to raise their position in Jannat al-Firdaus, and may Allah bless their surviving family members with the best of sabr and reward. And may we all Muslims and people of conscience, regardless of our faith and ethnicity and tradition, never forget the inhumanity that was demonstrated in 20th century in Europe. So today we pray, today we mourn, today we grieve, but today we must also reaffirm our commitment that we shall not allow ever again similar fate of any people, regardless of their faith and tradition and ethnicity. So it is my distinct honor today to have two of our friends, brothers from Bosnia, Herzegovina, and Brother Hikmat, Dr. Hikmat Karsic, who is a scholar in genocidal studies and has dedicated his entire life, professionally and personally, to continue to help all of us to remember the genocide in Bosnia. He's a researcher at the Bosnia Academic Institute in the city of Sarajevo, where I have had the privilege of visiting approximately last year in this month. And I would so encourage everyone, particularly my brothers and sisters in the United States, travel restrictions are lifted, to travel across on the speak and visit Bosnia Herzegovina and stand as an eyewitness to the situation in. Broadly speaking, on the genesis of genocide in Bosnia Herzegovina, and then also he will lift up the emerging denial by the Serbian fascist about the genocide itself. So it's my great honor and privilege to welcome on behalf of all of you, my dear brother and Dr. Hikmat Karsic. If I were to be in person, I would have clapped and made a big applause, but I hope we are able to give a digital applause to Dr. Hikmat. Brother Hikmat, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Brother Shakil. I'd like to thank ICNA for organizing this event in Sarajevo tonight and in the afternoon in the US. First of all, I'd like to again thank my dear friend Brother Shakil for organizing this event. And yes, we saw each other last year, and we were supposed to see each other this year again in Sarajevo, but due to the coronavirus, we've been prevented from hosting you in Sarajevo. Um, so I will give a short 20-minute overview of the Bosnian genocide, how it started, where, when, how, and so on. And I will end with a rising problem that we have today in the world, which is genocide denial and the glorification of crimes committed in Bosnia. So basically, Bosnian Muslims, Bosniaks, are are a Slavic Muslim population, which is located in Bosnia and Herzegovina in Southeast Europe, and we've been living here for the last 600 years, basically. So when I say Slavic, in the sense that we all belong to the Slavic race, so we have the same language, appearance, customs, and with our neighbors, with language is similar to people in Poland and in Russia and all over the place, and especially here with Croatia and Serbia. So if somebody was to see a person on the street in Sarajevo, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between whether he's a Bosniak, whether he's a Bosnian Croat or Orthodox Christian. Um, and this actually leads us to something which I'll explain later on what was the basis on what was the reason behind the genocide. So Bosnia, as a federal republic within Yugoslavia, declared independence in April 1992. And at that time, according to the 1990 population census, the Bosniak population made up a majority in Bosnia. And this was the first time in the last 100 years that Bosniak Muslims were a majority, had more than 45% of the population in Bosnia. And actually, this was the main trigger for Bosnian Serb nationalists to decide to take some radical measures against Bosniak Muslims. So the population census and the fact that Bosniaks were the majority in Bosnia uh, was the main trigger to commit genocidal massacres the next year. So when Bosnia proclaimed independence on the 6th of April, Yugoslavia at that time, which was basically a smaller Serbian state, because Croatia and Slovenia had already left Yugoslavia. So Yugoslavia was basically made up of Serbia and of Montenegro. They attacked Bosnia, and this attack actually was targeting Bosniak populations, villages around, and the genocidal campaign of destroying villages, mosques, executing men, women, and children, and so on, later on became popular by its name, ethnic cleansing, which actually is a euphemism for genocide, because ethnic cleansing is not a legal term, nor was it defined at all in any legal documents. This term, ethnic cleansing, is actually the terminology which was used by the perpetrators itself. They were using the term čišćenje or cleansing when in their official military document. So this genocidal campaign of getting rid of all Bosniak Muslims started in 1992. The reason why it wasn't successful was due only to one major reason, and that is the fact that the Bosnian Muslims, the Bosniaks, had organized themselves into a resistance force, which was able to defend a large portion of the country and most significantly of the population. So in 1992, at the start of the war, nobody else in the world helped Bosnia except for the Bosnians. And this is something which we actually learned from the past, from our history, from our very brutal history, that whenever there's a conflict, whenever there's a war, we Bosnians always know that we are basically left by ourselves. So in 1992, the Bosnian army, the Bosnian police, was able to defend themselves from physical extermination. After the initial defense, which was a very poorly organized, poorly armed defense, That's when the Bosnian government, with the help of its friends throughout the world, started lobbying and advocating throughout the world for support. And this was especially something which Brother Shakil already mentioned earlier, the goals to lift the arms embargo, because the United Nations placed an arms embargo on all of former Yugoslav states, which actually meant that you could not buy weapons legally in order to defend yourselves, but rather you had to smuggle them in through Croatia, Italy, Slovenia, and other countries, which of course was illegal. Um, so this actually genocidal campaign, which started in 1992, which was composed of mass executions, mass rape, the use of concentration camps, and this was fascinating, the reintroduction of camps after the Holocaust, 50 years after the Holocaust in Europe, the camps were being used again in the heart of Europe to incarcerate Bosnian Muslim men, women, and children. So these camps were also used, and this was something which was heavily publicized in the U.S. media, thanks to American journalists from Newsday, from Time Magazine, from British journalists as well, and so on. And these were people who actually helped put out the truth to the world at a time when many people were not willing to risk their lives to go into Bosnian Serb territory. Journalists like Roy Gutman, like David Roth, like Penny Marshall, and so on. They were the ones who went into Serbian territory to film and to take photographs and to report of these crimes committed. Now, these executions, which started off in 1992, lowered in intensity in 1993 and 1994 due to the fact that at that time the Bosnian government forces were able to consolidate their forces in the territory which they controlled. And they were able to put up a strong resistance for the remaining towns and territories not to fall. Basically, the largest amount of crimes which were committed in Bosnia were committed from April 1992 up to September 1992. So over the course of those several months, the majority of the crimes were committed. Later on, the Bosnian Serb army tried to take out one by one each of these so-called UN enclaves. These are small sieged towns in Bosnia, and there were 5 of them in Bosnia. And this was Sarajevo, the main capital city, Bihać, Srebrenica, Žepa, and Gorazde. These were five enclaves which were defended by the Bosnian government and which were designated as UN safe areas. Again, the UN was using a very interesting term. They were calling it safe area, even though it wasn't safe at all. They wanted to skip using the term protected area, because then it would mean that the UN needed to protect this. So the Bosnian Serb army, with the help of Serbia, and the whole entire war was basically waged from Belgrade. This is something which we need to keep in mind. They tried to take out each of these enclaves, and it was a total failure to them. Bihać was able to be defended. Gorazde was saved by Bosnian army, but also by NATO airstrikes in 1994. So actually, the first time that the Bosnian Serb army managed to run over one of these enclaves happened in July 1995, when the Bosnian Serb army had to mobilize 20,000 people to attack 20,000 soldiers, 20,000 perpetrators to attack the town of Srebrenica. And this attack lasted from July 10th onwards. So after the front lines in Srebrenica fell, and this was a very small, poorly armed Bosnian resistance without any heavy weapons and so on. That's when actually the Bosnian Serbs knew that they were going to take over the enclave, and that's when they decided to kill each and every male which they came across. The reason why they didn't target women and children was because they didn't have enough time. They knew that the UN and the NATO and the international community was monitoring everything which was going on in Bosnia. So they were trying to take out each and every male they came across by managing to try and justify this by calling it a battle, that these were people who were killed in a military fight. The Bosnian men decided not to surrender because they knew that 1992 was going to happen to them again and they were going to be killed. So they decided to break through the Serbian lines in a column of men, which also included a smaller number of women and children, and to break through Serbian territory and to go to try to reach the nearest town, which was under the Bosnian government control, and this is the town of Tuzla, which is 100 kilometers away. So they actually decided that it was better to die trying to get to the first free town than to surrender to the Bosnian Serbs. And a column of 15,000 men started to break through the lines, the front lines, and to go through Serb territory. And they were being ambushed, basically. The hills around Srebrenica, from Srebrenica to Tuzla, they were being ambushed in these forests, in these hills. They were being bombarded by Serbs. The Serbs did not go into battle with them in the forest because this is not something which the Bosnian Serb army did. They weren't brave enough to fight Bosnian soldiers in the forest. Rather, they were waiting for them, and they were forcing them to surrender, and then execute them blindfolded and with their arms tied behind their backs. So that's what they did, and that's actually how they managed to get more than 8,000 people to capture by pretending to be UN forces, by taking UN helmets and APCs, armored personal carriers, coming to places, capturing people, and then forcing them to call out their sons and fathers to come down and surrender. And we have video footage of this happening, where they captured an elder man called Ramo, who was forced to call his son Nermi to come and to surrender. And once you're threatening somebody's son with his captured father, the son surrendered from the force as well, and both of them were killed and executed, and their bodies were dumped into mass graves. So this is actually how the Serbs then managed to get the majority of Bosniak men from the column by tricking them, by forcing them to surrender, and then by taking them to 7 major execution sites throughout eastern Bosnia, tossing hand grenades into concrete hangars, blowing people up, collecting their bodies the next day, and then burying them into large football field mass graves. So this was July 1995. On the 10th of August 1995, Madeleine Albright comes out at a press conference with the State Department, where she comes out with several photographs, aerial photographs, which show that the Bosnian Serb army has dug up mass graves in eastern Bosnia. Then she shows these photographs, which are dated, which show disturbed earth on these small territories throughout eastern Bosnia. And instead of the Serbs coming forward and admitting that they executed 8,000 people, they decide to do something which no perpetrator has done in the world so far. They start removing these mass graves into multiple other mass graves. So, and of course, these mass graves weren't done in a professional manner. They didn't want it to be in a professional manner because the victims, the bodies of the people inside were Muslims, so they dehumanized and did not consider it to be humans at all. So they actually dug up these bodies with bulldozers, and then put them onto trucks, and then transported them 30, 40 kilometers away, and then dumped them into multiple other mass graves. So in the end, after the war, the Bosnian government insisted on finding all of these missing persons throughout the Bosnian War, and the Bosnian government was very persistent in doing this, and this was the the result of the advocacy of people who survived Srebrenica, but also the Bosnian government at that time, our late president Ali Izetbegovic, and also Amor Marčević, the president of the Commission for Missing Persons, who then insisted on getting each and every mass grave found. And they started doing this. And later on, with the help of the International Commission for Missing Persons, which was formed after pressure from the US government, they started gathering DNA samples, identifying victims through DNA analysis, which basically meant that they took blood samples from each surviving relative and matched it with the DNA extracted from bones, which were found in mass graves. So in the end, what we have is a result and the blueprint which shows how the Bosnian Serb army decided to get rid and to hide these bodies. In one concrete example, and most of these bodies which are found actually to this day are incomplete. Incomplete in the fact that we still haven't found all of these mass graves throughout Bosnia. In one case, a 14-year-old kid was found in 4 mass graves, which were 40 kilometers from each other, and only 4 bones were found from his body. So imagine if a normal standard human skeleton has 210 bones, you find only 4 or 5. The question is where are the rest? Where are 205 other bones? And the answer is they are scattered somewhere in eastern Bosnia. We most probably drive past them every day. We see them in the forests, underneath grass and flowers and things like that. And the search for missing persons and mass graves still goes on to this day. But what I wanted to show with this example of the mass graves, to show to what extent this crime, which was committed, was so institutionalized, was so state level, was so organized, and was so systematic that they spent a lot of money, a lot of manpower, a lot of fuel to hide the remains of 8,000 people. Nobody in the world has done this so far. Just imagine the person who has to go with a bulldozer, the driver who has to go and re-dig a mass grave, a portion of the mass grave, dump the skeleton remains onto a truck or lorry, and then the other driver takes over the truck and drives it down towards Srebrenica, 20-30 kilometers away. Goes to another field which has already been dug up by a third driver, mechanical repairman, and then dumps the body there, and then you cover up the whole body. So we're talking here about almost 20,000 people who took part in the genocide, not only by physically executing people, but by hiding it, by issuing fuel, by gathering fuel for people so that these bulldozers could work. And also, 25,000 women and children were deported from Srebrenica on these few days in July 1995. Imagine how many buses you need to transport 25,000 people. If each bus has around 50 seats, imagine how many buses you need to deport 25,000 people. So they had actually a shortage of buses to that extent that they took buses from the nearest Serbian towns in Loznica, in Šabac, in Užice, in Pančevo, and so on, which were brought over, which were used in order to deport Bosnian Muslim women towards Tuzla in July 1995. Now, the genocide in Bosnia is the most well documented and the most. We have so much forensic evidence, let alone witness reports, to prove what happened here. Nevertheless, in the last 25 years, and especially in the last 10 years, what we have is the rise of genocide denial in Bosnia, which 15 years ago was our problem, in the sense that Serbian bloggers from the US or from Serbia would write blog posts and publish ridiculous articles on their websites. Today, what we have is a state-level organized institutional denial, which is state-funded by Serbia and by the Bosnian Serb Republic in Bosnia. So we are talking here about state-level, state-endorsed and state-funded denial, which has actually become mainstream in some circles. So to that extent that it has become cool to deny genocide. It has become cool to make fun of genocide. We're talking about people who are making up jokes, who are creating memes on the internet. This huge subculture of anti-Muslim hatred, in which the Bosnian genocide is used as a justification and as an inspiration to attack any minority throughout the world. And we saw this with the Breivik attack in 2011 in Norway, where Breivik was a white supremacist inspired by Radovan Karadzic, the Bosnian Serb leader. He attacked and executed people who belonged to a different political organization. So they weren't Muslims at all. In last year, Brendan Tarrant in New Zealand in Christchurch was inspired by Bosnian Serb nationalists, war criminals, and he used this inspiration to kill more than 50 people in the Al Noor Mosque in Christchurch. So on one hand, we have genocide denial, which is state level, which has entered the pores of different societies throughout the world. On the other hand, we have this glorification and justification. So what actually happens right now is that the Bosnian genocide is not only something which we Bosnians are affected by. Bosnian genocide is something which people throughout the world are affected by. And the Christchurch actually showed that an atrocity committed in Bosnia can affect somebody on the other end of the world, maybe who has never been to Bosnia, who has never seen Bosnia, and who has been killed because he was inspired by war criminals in Bosnia. Unfortunately, this genocide denial has also entered certain Muslim circles, and this is something which I would really like to emphasize. Throughout the war in Bosnia, the regimes of Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi were very supportive of the Milosevic regime, but they were not sympathetic towards Bosnian Muslims. Certain governments in the Arab world today are still sympathetic towards Serbia, and we see this because they do not want to recognize Kosovo as an independent state. So this pre-war non-aligned movement is still very active today, and this genocide denial is also spreading in these circles. And also another important thing to mention is that we have certain self-proclaimed scholars who are very influential in certain circles in Southeast Asia, for example. Concretely, I'm thinking of Imran Hussein, who actually is a genocide denier, who denies that genocide occurred in Bosnia, who is very supportive of this genocide denial machinery in Serbia and in the Bosnian Serb Republic. And he is a very often invited guest to come and to talk about the crimes which were committed in Bosnia by blaming the Bosnian Muslims for whatever happened here in Bosnia, as he says. So this issue of genocide denial is not only narrowed down to Bosnia itself. It's not only narrowed down to Serbia itself. It is now becoming a global problem, and it will become a huge global problem if we do not try and start tackling it. With that in mind, this year, the Srebrenica Memorial published the first ever Srebrenica genocide denial report, which I was a very proud member of. And we actually tried to identify the main actors and the main tactics, the main talking points, which we used in order to deny genocide in Bosnia. And I would call upon everybody to go and all of our viewers to go and to see this Srebrenica genocide denial report, which can be found on the website of the Srebrenica Memorial. It's both in English and in Bosnian language, and it's now being translated into Turkish and German language. So this is something which, again, I repeat, is now becoming a global issue, and it's something which we all need to be aware of, because it can, again, interfere in our everyday lives if it's not being tackled in a proper way. Thank you very much, and I think I talked more than 20 minutes. Shakil, I'm sorry for breaking the time.
No, Jazakallah khair, but the hikmat has been inspiring and at the same time painful to hear the details that you lifted up. And I have several questions, but I'll hold it until until after Dr. Prasad is done, and we'll give you some break, and then we'll have some interaction, inshallah. Dr. Mirsad, may Allah bless you for also taking the time on a weekend. As Dr. Zahid said, this is your third program with ICNA CSJ in reference to Bosnia, and may Allah reward you for your scholarship and for dedicating and giving your time for this cause to help us learn more about the genocide of Bosnian people. So Dr. Mirsad's brief introduction is, you all can Google him, and you'll see a great deal of detail, extraordinary contributions to scholarship in this regard. But currently he is a professor at Florida International University, and his PhD is in the area of political science, and his thesis, in fact, was nationalism as a process for making the desired identity salient about Bosnian Muslims becoming Bosniaks. Dr. Mirsad lives in Florida, and he is joining us from there today. And he will, inshallah, speak also on, broadly speaking, about the Bosnian people, or known as Bosniaks in Europe, the people and the nation. So Dr. Mirsad, it is my great honor to welcome you, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Brother Shakil. First of all, I have to thank ICNA for doing this. This is not hard for me at all. I'm actually an active member of our local ICNA chapter here in South Florida. And I have to say to you that when I spoke first time with Dr. Buhari, I told him that I remember those demonstrations in New York City when ICNA organized, and where probably some 10,000 people came in the front of United Nations. And it was powerful to see 10,000 people. I think we prayed Duhr or Asr, I don't remember which Salah, but 10,000 people praying in the front of United Nations, and somehow we were turning actually toward the United Nations. It looked very powerful, and indeed, as Dr. Hunter said the other day, it indeed did make a difference in terms of US policy. I have to also tell you that during that time, I lived in New York, and also very active in supporting Bosnian Muslim cause, where various Jewish organizations, they organized protests almost daily for months. They were basically also trying their best to raise the issue, to bring the issue to the attention of the people in America, which is not always easy to do, because as we all know who live here, the life here is very busy. But eventually, things slightly changed, and the war was stopped, even though the Europeans were reluctant to intervene and reluctant to step in and stop the war. We learned the other day from Dr. Hunter how, once the United States decided to act decisively, right, the war was stopped relatively quickly, within 2 weeks. Well, I am very happy. I was pleased to listen to the presentation, Dr. Karcic. Very nice, very inspiring. I'm particularly happy, because I even forgot about it, that he mentioned Imran Hussein. I will refer to all of you, my brothers and sisters, that we're now living in a very interesting times where we're losing the criteria and we cannot assess informations that we are getting. And I will remind you that one of the nicknames, or one of the names for the Quran is the Furqan, is the criteria, right? And I had a chance to listen to Imran Hussein, and I mean, it's not even good to speak about him, promote him, but not only regarding Bosnia, but he's not a very, how you say, helpful actor right now for Muslims, because he's causing all kinds of other type of issues where people having a hard time finding our criteria to assess reality. But I'm glad that Dr. Kacic mentioned him. And I would, before I go, I prepare some little bit visuals, because I think people watching us would like to see some pictures. So I focus more on that. However, I want to kind of just highlight few small things that I think it's good to say before I continue, that somewhat, piggybacks on what Dr. Kacic said. That is that, why this is important for us Bosnian Muslims to remember Srebrenica, why we're making this effort to remind ourselves and the world about it, is because ever since we were left out of the Ottoman Empire, or maybe even before that, for the last about 100 years, we have experienced this type of crimes against us continuously. Some scholars, especially in the institute that Dr. Kacic is part of, they note about 11, 10, even that Srebrenica flower that you have symbolizes, I believe, 8, right? Dr. Kacic knows better, of previous genocides. So now Srebrenica comes as the one that we finally have institutions, state-sanctioned institutions, where we can document all these crimes, as Dr. Kacic have mentioned, through this Commission for Tracing of Missing Persons and other various groups, and even international activities such as International Criminal Court, where they document every bone they found. They actually put a number on it. They try to tell the story of that bone. And so for that matter, this is even more important genocide for us. But I can tell you, I have done here the lecture series of Muslim of the World lecture series, and we spoke about Guyana's Muslims, where this guy coming from. We spoke about, West Africa. We spoke about Volga Tatars and other Muslims. I can tell you that the similar history happened to other Muslim communities, yet there was no one to document. So, this type of crimes happen to Bosnian Muslims every time, every opportune time in the international sphere, which is basically time when there is a big international upheavals as it is now. I will try to scare all of you. And so, it is important to know. And so, but the crime of Bosnian genocide is beyond us, as Dr. Kacic said in the end. It's actually crime that is committed against the international order that is being forced upon Muslims by the international players. So we were expected to accept this liberal global international order, and at the same time, when we try to live up to the principles of that order, we are being constantly denied the simple human rights that we are entitled to as anyone else in the world. I teach a class on human rights, international protection of human rights, so I know a little bit about it. And, one thing that is also, I think, important to highlight, that term ethnic cleansing that Dr. Kacic mentioned, actually, it has been in use before. It was used as term, ethnic cleansing, when Poles and Czechs intended to purify their countries from Germans and Ukrainians, but it is actually extension from previously used term by Nazis. Nazis had that concept of racial hygiene program, and they were trying to create so-called Jewish-free German territory. So the term has been used before, and it only resurfaced in 1981 in Yugoslav media accounts, where they start establishing or trying to describe Serbian policies in Kosovo. And then, strangely enough, international community adopts the term, because as Dr. Hunter was saying last time, if you call it a genocide, then you have to act. But if you find some other name to call genocide-like situations, then, there is a room for, hesitation. So the term ethnic cleansing means rendering an area ethnically homogeneous by using force or intimidation to remove persons of a given group from the area, any area, right? So this is violation of all principles that are established in the United Nations adopted Declaration of Human Rights. And, you have to remember, United Nations was formed in response to Holocaust. So, some years later, United Nations comes to find the things. And there is an interesting discussion, legal discussion, between the difference in terms of ethnic cleansing versus genocide, where ethnic cleansing is seen as an attempt to primarily eradicate a particular population from a certain territory, while genocide is seen as attempt to destroy it. So that how, hair-splitting definitions are different, although you can see that they are actually one leads to another. But anyways, this is what international order came to define in Bosnia in order to, justify their own lack of action when it comes to Bosnian war. So it is important for us Muslims to remember that, because like I said, that world order is being expected, almost, I will say, sometimes forced upon Muslims. And yet when Muslims adopted, like Muslims of Bosnia, then they're denied basic elements of that, what that order entails, basic rights that order entails. So at this point, I will share my screen with you so that we can kind of see some pictures, if brother is there to provide, to allow us with possibility to share the screen. So I was to talk about Ramid is to share the screen with us and maybe turn the microphone off. I want to show you some images so that you can see how Bosnia actually looks. And, so that way it will get, more interesting to you. Bosnian Muslims refer, this is a photo that I've taken in Sarajevo some maybe 20 years ago. And this is a typical neighborhood in a Bosnian capital city, where you can see how, houses are clustered around the masjid. Basically, a Jama'ah structure, right? And people can go and pray when they need to, right? However, like that, let's not be confused. Bosnian Muslims are actually European people, right? They live in the region of southeastern. They call it southeastern. I don't know why it's eastern, but southern region of Europe, in the area known Balkans, right? Bosnian Muslims now refer to themselves as Bosniak nation, right? They are Slavic-speaking Muslims of Central and Southern Yugoslavia, and you can see here in this image, you can see basically how they spread throughout that central part of Yugoslavia. During those previous, let's say, maybe 50, 60 years, Bosnian Muslims were recognized as Muslim. That was our nationality. And we were, as a part of our religious identity of Muslim, being, also adherence to the religion of Islam. But we were nationally Muslim. Similarly, I'll tell you, President Clinton just recognized Jews in the United States as an ethnic group. So they're no longer just a religious group, they're also an ethnic group. So same way Muslims in former Yugoslavia and throughout the Soviet Union were oftentimes recognized as Muslims, in terms of nationality. And so Bosnian Muslims were also like that until we were actually able to reclaim our ancient name of Bosniak. And you can see actually the Arabic term, how it is written in Arabic. Why I put this on the screen for you to see, because like I said, Bosnian Muslims live throughout this region of Eastern Europe, right? They are the people who speak Slavic languages. And you'll see later in the screen, this language speaking is actually the primary marker of identity in Europe. And so it is, that's why we emphasize that part. And why? Because any other distinction or any other attempt to identify people by some sort of ethnicity, it's very problematic, especially in this area, because various people move through these areas and various people live through these areas. So, the most, how you say, stable way to identify people may be language. So as I said, they live throughout, central part of what used to be known as a former Yugoslavia, right? This is basically the borders of Bosnia, but you can see they're overflowing, right, into these regions, which are now, which is called Sanjak, parts of Serbia and Montenegro, and I am from there. I'm from Sanjak, so I'm not from Bosnia and Herzegovina. That is today, and they also overflow in Albania, in Kosovo, and now various parts of Macedonia. However, they're smaller numbers. Bosnia and Herzegovina and Sanjak are the main areas, or we may call it a homeland for Bosnian Muslims. Bosniaks live throughout the region of Ottoman Empire. Most of them actually end up there after Ottoman Empire withdrew from the region, after they lost the region in the First and Second Balkan War, right? Bosnian Muslims were forced to leave in huge numbers. They were talking about millions of people. But even before, I was reading recently a study by a professor from Australia, right? And he was talking about how Bosnian Muslims were actually, traveling throughout the Mediterranean and coming in contact with various groups and settling in different parts of the Mediterranean basin, because Mediterraneans, for all intents and purposes, were actually a separate unit, basically, separate from the rest of the Europe and rest of the Asia, where people frequently moved around, perhaps due to the fact that Roman Empire was there or various other things. But this is, for example, a mosque that Bosniaks have built in Palestine, and they still live there. And, they live in the areas of West Bank, Caesarea, Yanun, Nablus, and Tulkarem, and other parts of Palestine, nowadays Palestine. One of the prominent Bosnians was Jezayir Pasha, the Ottoman ruler, in 1775. But Bosniaks could be found also in Lebanon, in Syria, throughout the Turkey, obviously. And even some people claim that this researcher claimed the Bosnian also have settled in Maghreb, or rather in nowadays Tunisia and Morocco. So they were basically active part of, after Ottoman took over the Balkans, they were active part of the Ottoman Empire. So even then they moved. But the story about this, why is this relevant? Because the argument that this author makes is that basically Bosniaks started accepting Islam since 17th or 8th century. In other words, at the same time when other local Slavic groups started accepting Christianity. So the mass conversion to Islam came after the Bosnia was taken by Ottomans in 1492. And so Muslims or Bosniaks live in Bosnia and Herzegovina and then throughout the territory of the Balkans ever since that as Muslims. They're comfortable in their religion and they're comfortable in their fact that they are really fully European group. So now we speak about Slavs. It's maybe useful for your audience to realize who are the Slavs. Dr. Kacic mentioned that our languages are similar to the languages of Czechs and Poles and stuff. In fact, that's where the Proto-Slavs come from. The Proto-Slavs do come from that area here, right? So but you see, this is the whole Slavic group of people. And as you see here from the Balkans, right, this is the area that is strategically very important for Russia, right, to basically cut off sort of Germanic people from the east, right, direct access to east, and at the same time establish for themselves access to the warm sea ports in the Balkans. This is why this is so, contentious, so that you understand. Also, to remind you, Europe comes from this ancient Greece. The most famous Europeans were Aristotle or Plato, right? They were people from the Balkans, from the area where Bosnia is. So, this is why this is relevant. So Bosniaks are part of that Slavic-speaking, large sections of Europeans, right? Now, when it comes to that, we can say that Europe is divided between so-called three large groups, again, in terms of language and in terms of religion, right? So as you can see here, right, we have so-called linguistic division is between those people who speak Romanic languages, which is Italians, French, Spanish, Portuguese. And then we have Germanic people, right, who are mostly, in this area here, right? And then we have Slavs, right? Slavs who come from this area. And now all these groups are also divided between religious lines, meaning you have Catholics versus Protestants among Germanic people. The Romanic language group is mostly Catholic. And then Slavs are mostly Orthodox Christians, although there are sections that are Catholic, like Poles and stuff, but mostly Orthodox Christians. And now they're also divided between different religious groups. You have Slavs who are Catholics, you have Slavs who are Orthodox Christians, and certainly here you see MMM, you have Slavs who are also Muslims. So my point, what I'm trying to say, this is normal. The fact that we are Slavs and Muslims is actually, this is what our ancestors decided. They chose, they found Islam to be superior, as we have found Islam to be superior, and they adopted it as their religion, and they live as Muslims ever since. But you can see, basically these basic European lines of division, which is also maybe useful for your viewers to see it. However, as I said, firmly European country, right? It's hard here that I draw. I don't know how well I drew. The heart is where Bosnia is. So that's why I say I don't see how Bosnia is southeastern. I see Bosnia more as a south central European state almost, right? But nevertheless, let's use the language that is being used by different political actors, which usually is used to denote certain things, to denote distance and othering rather than acceptance. So for all intents and purposes, Bosnia is very much part of European continent, and in fact, like I said, it was part of the Greek state or Greek whatever civilization, then Roman civilization. Every European civilization that was ever being somewhat established in Europe, Bosnia was very much part of it. So very firmly established to be that. And why I mentioned this so much is because very important to understand, as I said, that it was a liberal world order that failed in Bosnia, and the actors failed to protect it, when we as Muslims have adopted those values. Now, demographically, this was a pre-war 1991 census. And you can see Bosniaks were about 44%, 45%, Croats about 17.5%, and Serbs about 31%. And, since ethnicities, or rather sub-ethnicities, we were ethnically all Slavs, but sub-ethnically, right, we are Serbs, Croats, or Bosniaks, right? They were decided based on the religious affiliation. This is why I note that this is how how this division was followed. Now, it is a question nowadays where Bosniaks only Muslims. This is why I mentioned they're predominantly Muslims, where Croats only Catholics, which I mentioned predominantly Catholics, and whether the Serbs are Orthodox Christians. These definitions vary, depends where you are in the region. But anyways, these are somewhat useful for you to kind of know. Bosnia-Herzegovina was, as Dr. Kacic mentioned, existed for a long time. But from 1945 until 1992, it was a federal republic of Yugoslavia. It was essentially a state like within the United States, let's say Florida, my state, right? And since 1992, when former Yugoslavia dissolved, Bosnia and Herzegovina basically have done the plebiscite, where people decided, that was asked by European Union and United Nations in order to be recognized as independent state, to basically organize that, and they did it, and the overwhelming majority of people, including some Serbs, voted for independence, and Bosnia was, became independent state, and it was recognized by United Nations in April of 1992 as the member of United Nations right before the war in Bosnia started. Former Yugoslavia constituted of several different states. You see Slovenia is here on the top of the, I hope you see it. Slovenia is here, right? This is where First Lady Melania Trump comes from, right? It's from Slovenia, then Croatia, which was, mostly Catholic, and then Bosnia in the heart of the former Yugoslavia, Serbia as a separate state, Montenegro. Now Kosovo here is now separated from Serbia, and that's contentious territory, which is yet to be resolved. Most of the members of United Nations, including Pakistan, to say that, recognize Kosovo independence. However, there are other contentious regions which there are other countries which are yet to recognize Kosovo independence. There is Albania, which is about 70% also populated by Muslims, and former Republic of, or rather now it's called North Macedonia, right, where you have also segments of Bosniaks who live there. And so you see, this is the former Yugoslavia from which Bosnia came as an independent country. Now you have to remember, Bosniaks embraced Yugoslav idea. Yugoslav idea was an idea, remember, pan-Slavic notion that they can somehow get to the warm port seas, to Mediterraneans, right? So they decided to build that former Yugoslavia. If I have chance, I will play you a national anthem of former Yugoslavia and national anthem of Poland, and you'll see how same they are. So you could note, this kind of the sameness. But Bosniaks embraced Yugoslavia. It was not difficult for them to embrace it because previous only political party that Bosnian Muslims and Bosniaks had was called Yugoslav Muslim organization. So they were in fact the only group that had a Yugoslav in its name. Only in 1992, the wife of Slobodan Milosevic created a party with the Yugoslav adjective in its name. But before that, none of other groups had a Yugoslav in its name. But Bosnian Muslims had. And so, and a symbol of that kind of acceptance of the idea of Yugoslavia, an idea of communism, which is basically denies religion, as you know, right, was that Bosnian Muslims participated in all activities that were meant to build Yugoslavia. And in fact, the main banknote in former Yugoslavia was like this one, which featured the Muslim man. The man, his name is Alija Sirotanovic, the man who was a miner, who was actually working so hard, that it was recorded that he was going into a mine to dig for whatever resources, and then he will occasionally ask for a bigger shovel so that he can actually shovel more of the things, and somehow show his acceptance of Yugoslavia. So his face on the main banknote in former Yugoslavia also symbolizes acceptance of Muslims of that idea of Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia means basically South Slavic sort of a region or state. South, Yugo means South. So Slavia, which is basically comes from Slavic group or Slavic ethnicity. So South Slavic, basically state. And then what? Then massacres came. Then the war in Bosnia, when Bosniaks and when people of Bosnia decided to separate, Bosnian Serbs wanted to carve out as much of the territory for themselves. And as Dr. Kacic said, driven by those old ideas, European old ideas of living space, Liebersbaum, they needed more space for their whatever group, for their nation. And so they wanted Bosnia, but without people. Just like our other neighbors, Croats, they wanted Bosnia, but without people. So, then they attempted to cleanse Bosnians. And it was a horrible thing to see during that time that concentration camps reappeared. And, I used this image from the front page of Times magazine, although Dr. Kacic pointed correctly, Newsweek was the first one to publish the story. But I use it so that you can understand this was not done in secret. Right now, like we can only imagine what is happening to our Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar, or what is happening to our brothers and sisters in China, in East Turkmenistan to Uyghurs, right? But here, there was no need to imagine. You can actually see it on the screen, on your television screen or in your newspapers, right? So it was very hard to deny that it was happening. So now, as a result of that genocide or ethnic cleansing, if you want to call it like that, as if there is a difference, Bosnian Muslims, a nation of about 4 million, less than 4 million if you consider people in the diaspora, but more or less about 3 million, are expelled, and now they live in 127 countries around the world, right? A small nation, and you see how we were expelled. So the same way that you see, images of Muslims today, this is what we went through. There were estimates vary about how many people were murdered there, but more than most of the people talk about 250,000 Bosnian Muslims. Thousands. There were numbers from about 60,000, 60,000 Muslim women raped. Unfortunately, why we don't know the numbers, because as for us, especially Muslims, this is a very sensitive issue. And a lot of women will be reluctant to speak about it. So we don't know the numbers, exact numbers, but we know that the numbers were in tens of thousands of Muslim women. And what was the crime of all these people? There is no other crime except that they were Muslims. You have to also note that Muslims at that time, remember, we accepted communism. We were not necessarily religious people, and we were not necessarily looking for anything sort of religious. We were looking for a civic state, a republic, where everybody will have a right to, freedom of choice, freedom to participate in a political system, freedom to kind of elect and be elected, all these liberal values. And they were murdered. So they were not murdered for ideology, they were murdered for their religion. And that was important. So now, just to end with this story, just to show you few more slides, right? This is where the Balkans are. You see their important frontier, right? They are a kind of region of Europe which is sort of mountainous and hilly. So Bosnia is that type of a country, beautiful land, right? With lots of rivers. In fact, the name Bosnia, according to some researchers, come from the description of water, plenty of water, right? It was part of Ottoman Empire, it was part of Byzantine Empire. But I will show you a few more images in trying to convince you to go and visit.
Dr. Mirsad, if you don't mind, I'm just wondering how much time is left, because I want to respect the hikmat. It's pretty late in the night there. So,
yeah, I said everything I wanted to say, essentially, just to show you a few more images, and that's it. Nothing else. We are, as far as I'm concerned, we can move on, right? That's all. These are the images from Bosnia, where you can see how Bosnian mosques look like, how Bosnian neighborhoods, a lot of greens, a lot of water, a lot of rivers, right? These are new mosques, new Islamic centers that were built after war, often with the help of foreign governments, including Pakistan. And I will, again, like Brother Shakil, I will invite you to go to Bosnia and have a good time. This is a Muslim majority country where you will be welcome, especially if you come with money.
yeah, Jazakallah khair, Dr. Mirsad. Very, very helpful. I see many people commenting in the comment section, appreciating the depth of the information that's provided by both of you, and may Allah bless you. A couple of quick reading the comments. One comment in particular that is in reference to Brother Hikmat's comment in that no one came to help Bosnia, which was true. But today, several people have written, Kashmir stands in solidarity with Bosnia. Palestine stands in solidarity with Bosnia. So I just want to lift up the solidarity that's being expressed while recognizing the unintended silence or lack of support back in the 90s. But I think there is a sense of recognition of that of that shortcoming for Muslims. So quickly, Brother Hikmat, I would ask, while other people are sharing some questions, a two-part question. One is, you mentioned, and it was so painful to hear about the mass burials of people from one place to the other, dislocation and so on. How difficult it is for in your research to really locate and then match the body parts of these victims. That's one. Two, if you also could kindly share some reflections on the Islamic aspect of the burial. So if you were to find only one piece of the body, not the entire body, what do we do? Do we bury that piece as giving the name of the person and then wait until more parts are found and then reburied? How does that work? I mean, this is so fascinating because people like me and others cannot just simply imagine even how that whole process goes through. And frankly, what does it do to you personally when you're going through that process?
So in order to find a mass grave, you need to come to information from people who took part in burying these men. Which means Serbian drivers, engineers, soldiers, perpetrators, and so on and so forth. Or in order to come across from witnesses who survived executions at those places. Most of these mass graves have been found. Let's say the major mass graves have been found, which contain over 500 bodies and things like that. The biggest issue right now is finding smaller mass graves, those which contain a few dozen bodies, a few dozen, or let's say one body. Those are really hard to find, and those would most probably will never be found. They haven't been found so far, because you have multiple cases in which, for example, a neighbor came and took out his neighbor, killed him, and threw him into a unmarked grave somewhere in the forest. So the only person who knows where this body is that neighbor who executed it. So in order to find these mass graves, the Bosnian investigators usually focus on these perpetrators with whom they talk, gather information from, sometimes even pay for information to be given to them. This process of connecting bones is very complex, very complicated, very difficult, and the Bosnian plus the international forensic experts, they needed a long time in order, and they still are trying to figure out different techniques in order to connect these bodies. As I said, in most cases, the bodies are incomplete due to this removal of bodies, conciliation. So in the end, what happens is actually that in some cases, you have only a few bones which will be buried. So this was, as you mentioned, an issue not only for an issue for families, but also from a religious point of view, because in many cases you had family members who found only a few bones. In it's only one bone, and the family members did not know whether they could bury it. Is it religiously acceptable to bury one bone? Is that okay? I mean, and so on, because in most of these cases, you have families who are waiting for years. If somebody found one bone in 1998 or in 2002, and until 2006, nothing has been found until then, 4, 5, 10 years and so on. So what do you do? What do you do later on? You wait. If you wait, then the mother of the victim dies. The wife, something happens to you have multiple other things which can happen in that time period while you're waiting for the body to be buried. And while you're waiting for the body to be buried, that bone is somewhere in a refrigerator waiting to be buried. So in 2010, the Council of Muftis of the Islamic community in Bosnia brought a groundbreaking fatwa, which said that you can bury a body of a shaheed, of a genocide victim, even if there is only one bone to be buried. This was a groundbreaking fatwa, which helped out a large number of families. So then later on, after 2010, a large number of people started burying the loved ones. And actually, the procedure right now is that you bury, if the family wants, again. You have families which don't want to bury until they wait until time is right, hoping to find more bones. You have cases. So the procedure right now is that after you bury a body, if new bones are found in the meantime, then there's something called the re-exhumation process and reassociation. This basically means that you, so each grave inside the victims of genocide, they are put in PVC body bags inside the ground. So if you want to add more bones, you can do so when the time is right. So whenever a new bone is found, then you have to re-dig the grave and then add the newly found bones into the body bag. And this so-called reassociation process is done mainly in the days after the 11th of July. So I think this year we had around 12 reassociations, which were conducted on the 13th of July this year in Srebrenica, which basically meant that the 13 graves were redug again. The body bags were taken out. These bones were placed inside, and very importantly, this is done by forensic experts, by court-appointed representatives, by family members, and so on. So this is done in a very professional manner. This isn't done by some NGO somewhere. This is done by the state. And that's something which is very important, because that is a state procedure which is being followed, and there is no room for any denial or any sort of misuse of these things. That's very important to mention. So this fatwa was very important, and it helped out a lot of families. I witnessed one specific case in which I mean, there's another possibility as well. The DNA matches a probability that the bone which was found in the mass grave matches the DNA which you as a family member gave. Now, if you have two sons, and the year difference between them was 3 years, and both of them are found, you have two matches for both of them, then you don't really know who is who, because you have two brothers, both of them went missing. There's no other way to figure out who is who, because the age difference wasn't large enough so that the medical experts can figure out whether a bone is older or not. So in those cases, the families are brought to a very difficult decision in which they have to decide who is who in these cases. Or if only one person is found and the other one is still missing, then they put both names on the grave, on the wooden grave, with the hope that they will get another DNA match for the other brother, or a twin, for example. There were twins who went missing. Another also case which I saw personally was an elder woman who the only one bone was found from her body, and it was this finger, or this bone finger right here. So out of the whole complete body, only one part of the fist finger was found. And when you extract DNA from a bone, you need to destroy the bone. So you need to destroy the bone to get the dust away from it to extract the DNA. So the authorities received a positive DNA match for the victim, but in the process of extracting the DNA, the bone was destroyed. So there was nothing left to bury. So you have a positive DNA match that one part of the finger was found of this elder woman, but they didn't have anything to bury. So in these cases, for example, that's when on another case, it was a very painful case to see, where a small girl who was 7 years old was also found. Same case. There was only one piece of, I think, one fragment of a rib that was found from her. The DNA was extracted from the bone. The bone was destroyed in the process of extracting, and then the family members wanted to bury it because they knew that the chances of the rest of the body being found was going to be very slim. So they decided, and it was allowed to bury the remaining dust from the bone into a test tube, which was then laid into the ground. So these are actually new experiences which we as Bosnian Muslims, Bosniaks, are facing, and as a result of genocide, we are facing it every day. And as such, our religious authorities are bringing very modern, let's say, modernistic approaches in understanding these difficult problems which family members are facing. And also one more thing also to mention, which is a fatwa related to rape victims from 1993. Since at that time we had a lot of rape victims in Bosnia, some of them were unfortunately being disregarded by their family members or by the local community. At that time in 1983, the Islamic community issued a fatwa which called upon all Muslims in Bosnia not to treat them in any other way other than as a shaheed, as a victim. And that they are pure in the eyes of God, and that they should be respected, and that any child born from rape should be treated as a Muslim and should be raised as a Muslim. So at this time in 1983, the Islamic community brought a very important fatwa which helped out raped women and girls throughout Bosnia in those very difficult times.
Jazakallah khair, Brother Hikmat.
If I may just add something to this, Brother Shakil, what Brother spoke, Dr. Kachi spoke about, very important, because some Muslims may be wondering why those people who are buried are disturbed. We know that they're being killed because they're Muslims, so therefore, legally they're shaheed. But it's very important for us as Muslims, not only Bosniaks, but Muslims in general, to establish these facts, because otherwise, like Dr. Kachi said, this is done by state-sanctioned institutions. So everything is properly noted and recorded. So, therefore, we can then later on bring this as an issue when discussions are being made and where the state destinies are being decided. So, for the greater good and for the good of the families, this is being done, and therefore it's perfectly legally acceptable, Islamically legally acceptable. And it's very important to mention that, because I know that there were some people who are questioning that and maybe not looking positively at these efforts to actually trace every bone, to register what happened. Because I had a chance to speak to Mr. Mashevich, who told me that actually from these bones, they often can recreate the whole story of how the person was murdered and where the murder happened, because of that stuff. And they learned so much, according to Mr. Mashevich, that some of the things they learned how to identify the remains were being basically utilized in after 9/11, when they were trying to basically identify victims. According to Mr. Mashevich, some of the things they learned to do in Bosnia, because this is international team of forensic researchers, they were able to utilize in other instances. So it is extremely important that this work is being done the way that it's done.
Yeah, no, Jazakallah khair. I have chills when I hear the details that the Hikmat laid out in reference to the genocide that took place. One of the comment I see here, which is perhaps a good reminder for all of the viewers, is This person simply wrote, "May Allah forgive us for every time we have fallen short in protecting life, period." All of us, many of us, are guilty of this crime. Some people have also asked if there is a link on this video which will be available later on YouTube. Absolutely, yes. Several of you have expressed that, and yes, this will be archived for future viewing, and we will make this available also on the ICNA website, so that you all can benefit from it. One last question, perhaps, again, in the interest of time. I mean, I personally have so many questions, and there are so many questions here also. I realize that it's late in Sarajevo at this point, and I hate to keep holding Dr. Hikmat with us. But Dr. Mirsad, you mentioned about the othering, the process of othering. So in the campaign and the attempt of denying the genocide, is this othering trying to make the Bosniak people permanently foreign in their own land?
Absolutely. I was actually hoping that Dr. Kacic will actually talk about it. And I want to actually share with you, I want to share with you how that othering was done. So if you allow me to share the screen, you'll see how the Serbian intellectuals, the church leaders, the political leaders, the scientists were doing that othering. They were describing Bosnian Muslims in a way, and this is, if you're looking for a good book on that, there is a book, it's called Bosnian Genocide by Professor, I forgot his name right now, but I'll remember it later. And you can pull it out. I mean, he did an excellent job in describing that whole process of othering. Where they were basically focusing, zeroing in on Muslims of Bosnia and trying to basically justify their actions to Europeans by that. And since, for example, my favorite one, I mean, not favorite in a positive sense, but there was a political scientist, and he's called a specialist on Islam, right? He's still a professor in Belgrade, and until recently, he was able to travel and give lectures all around the world, including the United States. He described Islam is opposed to any just relations, tolerance, and dialogue or coexistence, since clearly not all Muslims in Bosnia were religiously observant. Jeftić stretched his definition of fundamentalist to one of secular Islamic fundamentalist. Communist Islam, we were kind of noted as communist fundamentalist, Muslim fundamentalist, right? In order to encompass anyone and everyone who is in any way Muslims, right? Then you have other kind of instances where they are kind of describing Serbs must help Muslims cure or excise their rather naive tumor from their breasts, meaning Islam. But the most horrendous thing, dehumanization was done. So it's not othering in the sense of they are not us, which is constantly being done, but it is actually a dehumanization, right? So even the term ethnic cleansing was, in a way, dehumanizing, those who were to be cleaned, right? Those who were to be removed. And you can see how that goes. This is a police officer in one of the towns. He's killing a person who he knew all his life. But what is the most outstanding, I think, is that, as Dr. Kacic have pointed, for all these years, all these killings, especially in Srebrenica, this is a region of some 20 by 40 miles wide region. It involves several dozen villages, and no one have come forward to offer any information about mass graves. I mean, that was until recently. Now I hear some fewer and more Serbs come out, but this is reminiscent of what happened in Poland. In Poland, very often Poles have killed local Jews. And when those who are researching and searching for those mass graves of local Jews will have basically, they will just refuse to speak to those researchers, even though most of them know where the graves are. They will not say it. Same thing happening in Bosnia, where that effort to hide those crimes is taking this type of shape, where no one talks, no one points. Just 2 days ago, they are now searching for a big second big mass graves in the western Bosnia, where another local Serbian resident have finally pointed out that there is probably a mass grave there. So that othering was not done only in the sense of that Bosnian Muslims were not Serbs, but othering was done in terms of dehumanization. And I'm afraid to say this is not the only place. Now, that ideology, anti-Islamic ideology and anti-Muslim ideology that was very prominent in Bosnia is now worldwide, because that became accepted. It became a norm. And as I always point, the biggest evidence for that is the Nobel Prize in Literature this year was given to a person who is not a genocide denier, which is, I guess, Dr. Kacic can speak more about it, but he actually thinks that it was necessary. So he's not denying it. He's just basically saying, well, that's a fog of war. It was necessary to protect, white Christian Europe from this Islamic invasion. So, it takes another level. So it's not just a denial. It's not like, okay, it didn't happen. That was, no. It is a next level where a person knows what happens, but he somehow thinks it's acceptable. And we are not talking about the ordinary peasant in the village. We're talking about a Nobel laureate for literature, and then we are talking about those people who end up giving him a prize for Nobel Prize in literature. Where thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So much to talk about. Undoubtedly, 60 minutes or 90 minutes cannot justify this. But before we close, I'd like to share with the viewers a couple of things, because some of you have asked and referred to about the situations in other places. Someone said that Narendra Modi, the current Prime Minister of India, is attempting to do exactly what Milosevic and his minions had tried to do or did in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Other folks have talked the same about Kashmir. So one of the attempts, inshallah, by ICNA, Council for Social Justice, is to lift up the situations in China, in East Turkmenistan, as was referred to, in Myanmar and Burma, our brothers and sisters in Kashmir, and now almost 200 million Muslims in India who is going through this process. And lest we forget Palestine, and to draw parallels between what has happened, what is happening, and what can we do to protect for this not to happen ever again. And indeed, we shall also remember in the future programs the genocide in Rwanda also, which happened in the same time frame that the Bosnian genocide took place in early 90s. The next program will be in mid-August sometime. We are still working around with the dates, and that program will be dedicated to the tragedy and occupation of Hindu fascist forces in the occupied Kashmir for over 70 years now. So we ask that we be forgiven for our shortcomings, but also we ask that we always keep these painful memories alive and well in our hearts, in our minds, so that we are sensitive, keenly sensitive, to protect life and humanity everywhere and of all people. Some of the action items I would repeat again. I think we have mentioned this before. If I were to retire any place, then it would be Bosnia-Herzegovina, inshallah, for me. And I would urge and encourage all of my brothers and sisters, particularly in US, to take your families, take your children, stand on the sacred grounds of Bosnia-Herzegovina in general and Srebrenica in particular, and pray for those shuhada, and be a witness to the genocide that took place in our lifetime. Second, those of us who live in US, visit masajid that are established by our Bosnian brothers and sisters in different parts of our country, to get to know them, to interact with them, to establish friendships, relationships. In various cities, there are significant presence in Seattle, in St. Louis, and some in Los Angeles as well, and in New York, in Maryland, and so many other places. It's not that difficult to really Google and find out where the Bosnian restaurants are in US. Patronize them, visit with them, enjoy kebabchichi, which is one of the most spiritual, right? One of the most nourishing and spiritually enjoyable cuisine from Bosnia. And last but not the least, certainly read material about Bosnia-Herzegovina. There's so much material out there to read, because the history of Muslims in Bosnia is critical to Islamic history in Western Europe. We are no foreigners. We are no strangers. We were not born yesterday. Muslims. Read the book of Ali Izzat Begovic, The Inescapable Questions, challenging the Muslims of the West and civilizations, European and American civilizations, quote unquote, in general. And his book by Islam Between East and West. And there are so many materials that are available to us. So I would urge us to, inshallah, benefit from that as well. So with that, I really am deeply grateful to Dr. Mirsad from Florida, Dr. Hikmat from Sarajevo, Dr. Zahid Bukhari from Maryland. What a blessing that despite of this pandemic limitations and restrictions, we can transcend our geographic limitations by virtue of the technology that we all have been gifted with. May Allah protect you, your families, reward you in abundance for the work that you do, for the efforts that you're putting in, for the dedication that you have to remind the world about these tragedies. And I pray that at some point we, inshallah, meet again in person, in flesh, and continue this awesome work. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive our mistakes and shortcomings. And I close, honestly, I close with this Quranic reflection. I'm sorry, Dr. Mirsad.
Before you close, I would just like to add something which I think Dr. Kacic will agree is a lesson for Muslims in other parts of the world. Let's not misunderstand. There were also very good people who were Serbs and very good people. And it's very important for Muslims to establish these kind of connections and to establish this, to ally together with the good people, whoever they are, because only like that, these types of crimes can be prevented. In other words, whatever the case is, but we alone cannot prevent these type of crimes to happen. So I want to re-emphasize that, because I felt in the end we are doing the same thing. We are now othering Serbs and Croats. I want to re-emphasize that there were actually, this is the result of the regimes that were in power at that time in those two states. But there are plenty of good people on those both sides who are assisted then, who are still assisting us in finding out the truth of what happened in that war. So I advise my brothers in Kashmir. I speak to Dr. Shokat frequently, and I advise my brothers everywhere in Palestine and to actually, establish and get in touch with these people, good people on all sides, and try to document all these crimes, because that's the only way to actually deter those killers from doing what they're doing.
Appreciate the feedback. So I was closing with the Quranic verse as an inspiration for us, given the tragedy of Bosnia and Herzegovina and many other tragedies that we have referred to. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us, وَلَا تَهِنُوا وَلَا تَحْزَنُوا وَأَنْتُمُ الْأَعْلَوْنَ إِن كُنتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. Do not despair and do not grieve, for if you truly believe that you shall prevail. That's the lesson I, as a non-Bosnian, take from Bosnia, that you prevailed a tragedy, and you are, with grace, you're giving us an inspiration to resist gracefully without losing your dignity and humanity. And we hope and pray that we learn from your painful history and continue the struggle to regain and reclaim and rehumanize the humanity of all people, and inshallah help Muslims and Islam prevail. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.